Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mastermind, Body, and Spirit Show. Today's guest barely escaped a 10-month incarceration for robbery. 10 years later, he stood on the podium with 8 other men as an Olympic silver medalist. He is one of few Olympians ever to have started learning his sport only 4 years before winning a medal at the Olympics. He currently works at the Canadian Olympic Committee as National Manager of Game Plan and Athlete Wellness and Transition Program for supporting 3,000 Olympic, Paralympic, and national team athletes across more than 54 sports. He is a Canadian sports system expert, keynote speaker, dad, and drummer who has played with award-winning artists. Welcome to the show, Jeremiah Brown. What's up, brother?
Hey, Matt. Good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's good to have you, man. I got reached out. I can't remember who reached out on your behalf, and I got to look at your book and your story, and it was really fascinating. So we have definitely a lot of correlations with sport. So your story is very fascinating from what I looked into. Do you just want to kind of give us a little background on that, and then we'll kind of dive into where you are now and all the amazing things you're working on?
Sure. I'll try to paraphrase the whole book.
Perfect.
in a couple of sound bites to get us started. So I'm a small town Ontario, Canada guy. Grew up playing hockey. Was an okay athlete, I'll say, for most of my life. Played football in university at McMaster. Injured my shoulder in my 3rd year. And this whole story of trying to become an Olympian in 4 years starts when I was actually right here. I'm at my parents' house this morning in Cobourg. I was in the basement in the next room, actually, watching replays of the Olympics from Beijing. I was lying on the couch, just smashing chips into my face, totally out of shape. And these guys were rowing to a gold medal for Canada. And I saw them on the podium, and I thought to myself, man, those guys look a lot like me. They've got long arms and legs. And, you know, what's the difference? Like it's such an incredible moment. Why can't I have that moment? And so that's how the dream took root inside of me. I shaped my whole life around this dream. At first, it was almost subconscious, like it kept nagging at me. And then I took steps to really pursue it. I moved out west to Victoria, British Columbia, where the men's team trains. I showed up and met my first coach, Doug White. Met him at a Howard Johnson a restaurant just beside the lake where the rowers train. And he looked at me, we sat in a booth, and he said, Jeremiah, what do you intend to do with this sport anyways? You know, he's trying to size me up, figure out who this guy was. He just showed up. And I said, I was kind of rocking back and forth on my seat with this inner intensity. And I said, I want to go to the Olympics. I want to win a gold medal. And I didn't know what to expect. Maybe he was going to laugh, but he didn't. He just looked at his wristwatch sort of metaphorically and said, we don't have a lot of time. We better get you going if we want to get you to the Olympics. And so then the journey just began in earnest. I started training in the mornings before work. So I had gotten a job out in Victoria working for a bank, and I started rowing at 7:30 in the morning, tried to get to the YMCA at lunch. And from there began, a journey that really tested every fabric of my physical abilities, my mental fortitude, my soul. It was really an all-in experience. And the one thing I've left out until now, I just realized, is that I had a 4-year-old son in tow, my little guy Ethan. And so I was a young father, and I had this, I guess a big part of the motivation was I had this sense that maybe my life had been written for me in a way, because my son was born to my high school sweetheart and I, when we were, we had been together for 4 years, and we were in our second year of university when he was born. And so I think we both had this sense of, well, we've got to be responsible parents now. And for me, part of that was of pursuing this dream was to say, well, no, actually, if anything, I want to model for my son that, no matter what your circumstances are, you can really go after things. And there's never a perfect time to pursue a crazy goal. And so that was almost part of my motivation, actually, to see this through. So that's kind of the outline shell of my story.
Awesome, man. That's really interesting. Well, I have, I've heard a lot of Olympic stories, because a few friends of mine went to the Paralympics, and I watched how hard they trained. You have to train in, all the time. And a lot of the Canadian Olympic athletes we're underfunded, I think, compared to some of the other countries. Like you can do it as a full-time job. So I know a lot of athletes have to do a job and then they train for the Olympics also, which is extremely time consuming. So how did you manage like life? Like, you know, a lot of people, I think that they think it's not possible for them, right? They have this idea and then it's not possible. But, you know, if you give yourself the idea and you say, okay, you know, it is possible, then there's a ton of work that goes with it. It's hard. It's not easy. But you kind of need to make that decision first. So do you want to speak about like, what was that like? Like, was it a decision in you that you're like, hey, I'm going to get this done and I'm willing to put in those early mornings, you know, and get this done? Because I can imagine the first few weeks of training were pretty tough. Like, how did you like manage that and go through that?
So the more I thought of it, the more I started to develop a multi-year plan. Well, really like a 2.5-year plan, basically. By the time I was out in Victoria, it was around 2009 that I began rowing, and then the Olympics were halfway through 2012. So, you know, I had sort of 2.5 years to make it happen. And so I started planning my life around the goal, and that included a financial plan. Because you're right, the funding, it's still not very much. If you establish yourself as a top senior athlete within your sport in Canada and you're competing internationally, you can get what's called a senior card from the federal government, and you get a stipend. I think it's up to $1,800 a month now. So you can cover your rent and your food and your essential costs and live off that. But it takes time to go from just a developing athlete or a complete newbie like I was to reaching that level. So for me, a financial plan was actually a big part of it. I was saving all my money left over after my cost of living expenses to save about 10 or 12 grand to pay for my first year. And my goal was to get on the team, and that would give me sort of an initial development card, it's called, where I got, it was $900 a month. And then I knew I'd have to cover like another 900, and that was my basic expenses, about $1,800 a month. So that financial plan was part of it. I think as an athlete, if you just jump into it and, you know, you're just going to go into debt and just try to, you know, live the dream and hope that it all works out and that you get sponsors or that things work out financially, I think that's a tough route to go. So I had this plan and I was able to do that. In terms of, you know, thinking about the opportunity cost, let's say, or like stepping away from this safe bank job that I had and all that, you know, it's just the old, you know, I've got this body once, I'm young now, you know, if not now, when, and what's the money for anyways? So I just wanted to really pursue my potential as an athlete and go for it. So that's kind of how I thought about it. You know, the financial piece was a big part of it, and just thinking about, okay, what are the steps I need to get there? What are the possibilities in terms of what could go wrong? At the end of the day, if I kept falling out of the boat into the water and it just wasn't working out, I mean, I could always go back to the bank job pretty easily. So that's kind of what framed up, you know, my pursuit.
Awesome. I like that, man. Well, one of the things that makes me think of is one of my really good friends, Sean Fitzgerald's a banker, and he's a young guy, super smart, really, really smart, huge heart. And, you know, we met at Burning Man, and he just wasn't happy in his job. He had, you know, I was like, well, how much do you make? And, you know, he's like, it was kind of direct question, you know, and it was a lot. It's a lot of money. And I was like, I only asked because I was like, well, then you have the money to like work a few months and then do something else. And I go, you know, man, I was like, banking will always take you back. And so he ended up leaving his job and traveled the world for, I think, about a year and a half. He ran out of money. Then he just went back to banking and got an even better job, you know, and he's back in banking, and now he's looking to kind of, you know, consider, you know, options in the future. And he's thinking like a year or two. And I was just like, man, banking will always take you back. So it's important to kind of, you know, if you have that dream or the desire, and I think a lot of us have something that we want to do, you know, something, you know, that's calling to us, and we kind of put it on the back burner. So they gave me a few questions to ask, and you can touch on that before I go into one. But one, because I'm an athlete too, it says, why is rowing considered one of the hardest sports in the world? And I've heard that. Just being athletic though, I'm just like, okay, you know, you definitely need to explain that to me.
So actually, just recently, I heard our team doctor, uh, Mike Wilkinson. He's also the team doctor for the Vancouver Canucks and some other pro sports teams. And he was interviewed by the World Rowing Federation, and he said that rowing had rowers in terms of lactic acid buildup in their bodies, which is the thing that causes really painful byproducts. It's that sense of, you're suffocating and your muscles are seizing up and you feel paralyzed. That physiological experience in rowers, the lactic acid was tested in terms of non-medical emergencies in the human body. Rowers were tested the highest out of any athletes tested after a 2,000-meter race. So rowing it's a power aerobic sport, and basically you take off the line. It's 2,000 meters. Depending on your boat class, whether you're in a big boat or a small boat, it's anywhere from 5.5 to 7 minutes long. And you're basically in that zone where you're sprinting, but it's too long to just full out sprint. Like an 800-meter running race is sort of a similar sort of parallel, but even that's a couple minutes. I'm not sure exactly. And so once you get halfway through the rowing race, you're already burnt up. You're in pain. You've got this lactic acid, these byproducts in your body, and it's really just about leaning into the pain and embracing it. Rowers you have to be a little bit masochistic. Well, you have to be very masochistic. And as you're coming into that final quarter of the race, you're getting tunnel vision. You're seeing little galaxies in your vision. Your head feels fat. You're just relying on muscle memory, and you're really just destroying your body in the final moments of a race. And our enigmatic British coach used to say that you rode the perfect race if it took 8 stretchers to get you off the water, because everyone went unconscious during the last possible stroke. So, I mean, that's a little bit about rowing. It is really a pain game when you watch it on TV. Most people aren't that familiar with the sport, so they say, "Wow, it looks very elegant, right? It looks very beautiful," but it's all an illusion. The body really is, combusting. And speed skating, you can say the same thing. I was in Korea at the Winter Olympics with the role of the Canadian Olympic Committee, and I went and watched these athletes, and they look so smooth and it's so beautiful, but they're burning. They're burning up on the inside. So it's a bit about rowing.
Yeah, that's what I thought it was. I trained with Shaolin masters in China. They basically would just break your body. You would take you to the pain part and then push you way beyond that. So, with that being said, there's something interesting that, in your book you talk about. I think it's really important. A lot of the athletes, after they retire from sport, or even during, they have, they're not sure what to do with themselves. You talk a little bit about mental health, anxiety, depression. How do you think becoming an athlete helped? Do you have any advice for athletes or people in general? Because I think it's something that's very common. Depression is rampant. Young kids are rampant. The reason why, I wrote Zen Athlete is to give kids the mindfulness of what I learned in martial arts through sport, kind of like mindfulness through this little catalyst. They want it. They like sport. They enjoy sport, but they can learn these lessons with it. So what have you learned about that? What advice do you have?
Yeah, I mean, that mindfulness stuff that you talk about, on your platform and with other guests, it's something that I've come to a little bit later in life. I've always been an anxious kid growing up, and I think in a way that anxiety and that sort of that inner critic that pushes you, it can be good for high performance, but it goes two ways. It can also cut you down if you're not careful and you don't manage it. So as an athlete, in particular, in compressing my experience into these 4 years of just a brute willpower efforts, where I locked myself in this prison of, I'm going to achieve this damn goal and I'm not going to give myself a way out, in a way that was hugely empowering, because I created this mindset that I think, even like, I wasn't the only tall, kind of big, strong guy that showed up and wanted to crack at this. I think one of the things that differentiated me was this ability to lock myself in. But on the flip side, there's always a cost, right? There's a cost to doing that. You can't expect to sort of put yourself in this mental dungeon to say, I'm going to do this come hell or high water, without a cost. And so after the Olympics, you mentioned some of the epilogue of my book. I talk about how, I didn't really process the pressure that I was under, the stress that I was under until, a couple of years afterwards. It kind of came bubbling up to the surface. And I think a lot of athletes use endorphins from working out. It almost masks some underlying predispositions maybe to anxiety, to depression, and some of these mental health issues. And what makes athletes, particularly I'll say in aerobic sports, be able to go into the hurt locker and really dig deep are the same kind of character attributes that can sort of predispose them to, when they don't have a fixed goal, falling into a period of depression or succumbing to anxiety where it just seems to be spiraling out of control. So in my work with the Canadian Olympic Committee across many sports, I've met many Olympians and Paralympians, national team athletes, where you hear these similar stories about, coming outside of sport, or maybe they're active and they have an injury. And it's kind of like, wow, who am I now? What do I do? How do I go from this focused regimen to what's next? Or how do I fill the time? And that's where, you can get into a bit of trouble. Yeah. So it's in terms of the transition, honestly, it takes time. It takes time to cultivate other parts of your identity, other interests. When you've narrowed yourself to such a sharp point in terms of, I am this Olympic athlete, this is who I am, this is what I'm meant to do on this earth, that's great. And you could argue that's needed. I talked to one of my heroes in rowing, Zito Muller, and he said, you don't win an Olympic medal without being obsessed, and I think that there's some truth to that. But obsession is not a healthy thing in terms of an ongoing, life experience. So yeah, it's a balance that, like you said, not just athletes, that we all play in this life, of pursuing goals, or just regular life, trying to make ends meet. And we all know someone who's dealing with mental health issues, or we will ourselves, if we're not now, deal with something in the future. So I think it's just important to talk about it, and attack the stigma that way by sharing our experiences.
I hear you. Yeah, it's pretty simple. It's funny because, just even talking about it, right? It's something that goes under the shelf. And, when I work with athletes before, a lot of them that will come second, they habitually like choke under pressure or whatever. It comes back to some sort of, personal issue, whether it's self-worth or self-love or depression or mindset thing. And I think that we forget that. And a lot of people who look at athletes, whether it's LeBron James or I always use him as an example, but just somebody who is achieving a high level at sport or music or whatever the case is, and think that life is great. And you just have different stresses, it's just different. And so if you're, in the family unit in middle class or whatever, you have different stresses. But we kind of want to mask everything and not really get down, not reach out for help, I think. And I think it's mental health is a lot more prevalent and important, to speak about, because it's not the Instagram filter, life is just amazing. And here, put these photos out and everything is gravy.
Right.
So I definitely agree with that. So what are your thoughts on, peak performance and motivation? You say motivation's overrated, and like, what are some of the fundamentals? I see, sport, you took an idea that you wanted to do, you did it, and you learned, I'm sure, quite a massive amount. What I kind of share with people is, through sport, it doesn't matter what your idea is, a business, more passive income, more vacation time, whatever life you want, get really clear on the life you want to live, right? And then, treat it as like what you did for the 4-year Olympian, it's like, this is my goal, right? But you have a lifetime to go through. You had 4 years, give yourself 8 years to create that life. But I don't think that we give ourselves that time and space to really think about all the elements of the life that's really heart-centered and fulfilling for us. But if you apply that dedication that you did to become an Olympian, then it's going to happen. It's just going to happen over time. So maybe you can give some feedback on, peak performance, motivation, inspiration, putting in the work, or, some things you learned along the way.
Yeah, almost like the title of the book, The 4-Year Olympian, is almost a bit misleading, to be honest, because, I don't want to suggest that it was fast and it was easy, and look at me, I became this Olympic medalist. It was 4 years, but it was the hardest thing I'll ever do in my life. And, I put my whole soul mind, body, and everything into that pursuit. And I had great teammates, and I had great coaching, and like a million other things went my way. Who can count on their ex-girlfriend moving back in to support them on this journey, which happened for me, things like that. So, I kind of look at it like, um, you need to have a plan, but you also need to have these other things line up for you. But one thing's for sure is that you will not succeed, most definitely, if you don't have a plan, you don't have conviction in how you're going to get there. And it may not be right, but having the confidence to take those incremental steps and take action and then learn slowly through action, and measuring yourself and progress in a time frame, ideally in years. So even if it's only a few years versus days or weeks or months, if you can sort of uh, have a sort of a time-bound goal where you're thinking over 2 or 3 years or 5 years, where you want to be. I found that very effective for me in terms of this particular goal. One thing I learned when I first started training full time in 2011 with the team, about 4 weeks into training, I was now training 18 times a week, sometimes 4 hour-and-a-half sessions a day, with our heart rates just pinned, and it was just, uh, a total assault on the mind and body. I broke down pretty quick. I broke down physically, felt like I'd been hit in a truck. I descended into that training fog that anyone who's done any kind of aerobic exercise or sport knows about. And it was just so different than what I had ever done before that I really had to figure out how to get out of bed in the mornings and just continue. And at first, I just started asking myself, okay, here we go. Can I survive one more day? But if I kept doing that, maybe I could have lasted until day 60 or 75 or 103. But then on 104, like one day I would quit for sure, because like logically and rationally, it didn't make sense what I was doing. There wasn't really very much in the way of precedence for doing something the way I was doing it. And so I had to switch from a sense of, day-to-day motivation to just a real like bedrock of resolve. And it's easy to like say these words, like bedrock of resolve. Well, that sounds nice, but to live it, to really live it and experience it, it's so personal to each, to you, and it's so personal to your experience of what that means. Like you're having that inner voice. Often it's like that duality of, yeah, I think I could do this, and then yeah, there's no way, buddy, that you can do this, and there's that conflict. And resolve is what gets you through the chatter day to day and allows you to stick to that long term, sort of year by year progression that you're looking for. So I mean, that was one thing. I mean, my motivation ran out. I wasn't motivated. I just wanted to quit all the time. And so I just began to rely on, I almost voiced it this way to myself. I said, okay, you had all the information, you had all the inspiration at a moment in time, and you decided to go for this goal. And now you're into it, and now it's way harder than you ever expected, and it's different than you ever imagined it would be. But you made a promise to old Jeremiah, to former Jeremiah, who made that decision in a point in time and space. You made a promise to that guy that you're going to do this. And I felt, this personal responsibility to see it through and almost respect myself and the decision I had made and to continue. So, I mean, that's a little bit about how, motivation, inspiration, that comes and goes, but the resolve, that's what gets you through the long term. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I just feel like I'm going on tangents here, Matt.
No, good. That's the idea. Yeah. If I can get you to tangent, then I'm doing a good job.
I'm trying to find it, I'm trying to articulate it, but I don't want to be one of those people that just preaches at people. Like I want people to taste, and understand and feel like how difficult it is. And it should be, it should be incredibly challenging. You'll feel like you're the only person in the world, dealing with it. But this is the truth. This is what it is to chase these really stretch goals.
Yeah, 100%, man. And I think that's really good advice because, motivation and inspiration, they come and then they go. And one of the things that I've done and do, it's like jumping in really cold water. If you do like a polar plunge or something, it's just like before you jump, you know it's going to suck, you know, unless you're Wim Hof, and it's going to be fine. You're totally cool with it. But it's going to be terrible. And you jump in and you're like, oh my God, why have I done this? Your body shuts down. It's super cold. But when you make a goal and a decision, it's that kind of idea stretched over time. And so you've got to find somewhere in you that keeps you going. And unless you are really firm in your resolve or your understanding of why you're doing it and the commitment you made, you're going to unwaver off the thing. So same thing when I went to China. I knew the training was going to suck, and it sucked way harder than I could have even imagined. But I showed up and I was like, damn it, I'm here, and pushing me past, you know, where I thought. Sam, I'm training with a native elder now, and we're doing martial arts, and I knew what was going to happen. But now I'm in there and I'm holding a rock out, you know, and I'm done like 4 minutes ago, and he's still making me hold it. And he's like, your body's lying to you. Your body's lying to you. And I was like, damn it. It's like,
Yeah,
it's
the
telling me to
body's
drop
lying.
it. Yeah. Yeah. And
It's,
so go ahead.
sorry, it's just funny that you say that, because our coach, Mike Sprackland, he was this elderly British guy. And he used to say that to us on the lake all the time. The body lies, you know, the body doesn't want to continue, but it can continue. So I feel you, man. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and you did it in like what you talked about, you know, the rowing machines in CrossFit, but you're doing that maximum exertion, and it's awful. It really is a form of terrible torture. And you know, when I did long distance running, it's like some sort of weird, terrible torture. But when you go past what you think you can do, it opens up this whole new realm of thinking of what's possible within yourself. And so the thing when I'm like talking to people, it's like trying to get that idea in their mind, that lifestyle or that thing that they want to create in life. You know, you got one shot at this life, unless you believe in reincarnation, then you get multiple shots, but you're in this one now. So what do you want to design over 10, 20 years? You get that opportunity. And if you design something and you think about it for enough time and you really want it, those struggles you're going to kind of get past, because it's the same thing in entrepreneurship and in everything. It's not easy. It's really hard. It's hard a lot. But if you know what you're doing, then you're going to have the resolve to get your ass out of bed and do the things that you need to do to create that vision.
Yeah, this is a really important point that I wanted to stay on for a second, because like the reason that you're doing something that's, let's say, out of the ordinary, so it's in terms of a goal, in terms of a stretch goal, let's say, like you have to be compelled by it. It has to be something that you can't ignore. This wasn't just one of several ideas. Like, okay, I'm just going to do this, and then I'm going to go do that. Like everything pushed me towards this goal, and for whatever reason, all my motivations, everything that happened up to that moment in my life where I made this decision to go forward, was pulling me towards this um, point where I couldn't say no. Like I had to do it. And so when inevitably you get started, and it's like we've talked about, it's way more difficult and different than you ever imagined. Like what is that bedrock inside of you? Like what is compelling you to do something so strongly that is going to allow you to get through those moments? I think that's a big part of it too. If you don't have conviction in your plan, you're just sort of saying, well, I'm going to see how it goes, or I'm just going to do this because I have, for lack of a better option. That's a bit precarious. That's a tough position to be in. I think that we would be naive to talk about these goals as if it was just, yeah, I just thought it over and I made the plan and I just did it and I executed it and here we go. I've got this Olympic medal. No, it was, I have to do this one thing and I'm compelled to do it. I can't even explain why. That inner cauldron of intensity, whatever it is, it's pointing me in this direction. And if you don't have that, um, maybe it's not the right goal. Maybe you need to keep looking. But I don't want people to think that I was flippant about this in any way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, 100%, man. And it's important. You know, I think that's what a lot of us are doing. We're going through life, and we were able to make a living or whatever, but we kind of stopped thinking about what would be an extraordinary existence for us. And once you find whatever that is, and it doesn't need to be extravagant. A lot of the times if I work with somebody, we do I call it like a heart hypnosis, and I hypnotize you into your heart, because your brain is always giving me stupid answers because it wants to survive. But the heart, every single person, I've done this with multimillionaires, I've done it with athletes, I've done it with regular Joes. They just want to contribute in some way. They just want to be around good people, and they just want to be in nature. It's like they just want to be human. And so if we can kind of get to those core fundamentals as we navigate life, which can be super challenging, we're on a little bit of a track here, but we kind of get wonky in what we want. And then it's kind of like Jim Carrey said, I wish everybody could be rich and famous, so they know that's not the answer. Right. And so you get the thing, and then your business or your goal, and you realize like, oh shit, I still feel shitty inside, or whatever the case is.
It's so true. And this whole Olympic ordeal that I went through, it's taught me that I value the same things you just talked about. I'm happiest when I'm having dinner with. It's the simple things, and it's funny that we have to go through such great marathons sometimes to get to that awareness.
Yeah, I totally agree. And well, I was gonna ask too, because like you're there, and sometimes if I'm chatting with someone, it's just like it's not that end goal, right? So it's like you get the silver medal or the gold medal. And it's like, now, did you feel like you were enough? Did you were like, oh yay, now I'm worthy and I'm an okay person, or does everything like stay the same? Like when you reach that pinnacle moment, what realizations did you have? Was it overwhelming satisfaction and like I just did this crazy thing, or did you have that little piece of like, yay, now I'm enough and life is going to be okay? Or what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was electric emotion from the moment we crossed the finish line. It was all of a sudden wearing this new identity of, wow, I'm an Olympic medalist. This is crazy. I just watched like these guys on TV a few years ago, and this is surreal. And there's incredible pride of having accomplished the goal, and that does last. There's a honeymoon phase. I remember coming back to Canada, and everyone's happy and cheering you on. You do these speaking engagements and rah rah rah, and then eventually, your 5 minutes of fame slowly kind of fizzles out, and you're just back to, kind of your resting day-to-day human existence. And yeah, I mean, it's you can't live based on accomplishments you have from the past. That's no way to live a life. And if you try to do it, you try to live purely on your brand of I did this thing in the past without growing or moving forward. I mean, that's a recipe for depression. It's just not going to work. So, I went through it's been 6 years now since those Olympic Games, and honestly, it's been just this realization of the things you said. Like my goals now are, yeah, I want to have basic financial security for my family, like anyone does. But it's how I spend my time. How I want to have a balanced life where I can work out, I can feel healthy, but not work out too hard where I'm hating my life. I can spend time with family and friends. I can get involved in my community, and have good relationships. And it's just like, how do I create my life, my goals in a way that I'm going to be able to actually have that versus, being super ambitious and just going off the deep end on some other crazy goal. Now I'm just like trying to resist, and temper that ambition that's inside of me and just be like, okay, Jared, just, take it easy. Let's just relax and enjoy this life. We got a few more decades left here. Let's have some fun and enjoy life. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, it sounds like maybe you can disperse that energy, like to other quadrants of life, some for the kids, some for the family, some for the financial, rather than laser focus that, and now that if you laser focus it, you can achieve something, at a world-class level, something that very few can achieve. And now like the priorities shift a little bit, but you also can take that education with you into anything that you do. I wanted to ask, I don't know if you speak to kids in high schools or anything like that, but that would probably be cool if you did. What advice do you have for youth? Because I think that youth, whether it could be in sport, that are in sport and they, are doing that kind of thing and how they can be better athletes, but just in general to youth, about what you learned being an Olympian. What would you want them to know about life or anything?
Yeah. I think the first thing I'd say is just remember to be kind to yourself. We're living in a world where we're so data centered, we're measuring everything, whether it's our social media following or our VO2 max or our bench press or how high we can jump box jumps, or whatever it is. It's just exhausting, right? And the kids are all wired up and everyone's living on their phone. We're all doing it, and the youth are no exception. So I think it's just a lot to process for anyone these days, and I think the message of just be kind to yourself is an important one, as important as ever. And having an inner voice, that quiet kind of gentle voice that says, hey, you're all right, you're doing okay, and baby steps, and just be nice to yourself. I was very hard on myself as a teenager. I was very intense, and I'm glad. My friends would probably tell you there's still that there, but it's tempered now, and so that's where I would start. The other thing is, in terms of goals and how the future would be, I just say to teenagers. I mean, I've talked to a few high schools. They're a tough crowd. They're so distracted, but just try something, right? Just don't worry so much about having to have the whole career plan figured out. And if you're an athlete in a sport, wanting to be, I don't know, the CrossFit champion, or skateboarding in the Olympics now, and you want to be in a skateboard, the first Canadian or American skateboarding Olympian, or whatever it is, just focus on the steps in front of you. And it's a windy road, and the path is always changing. So don't get so caught up in your own head that you're not taking specific actions moving forward. And that can be as simple as like talking to someone like you, Matt, about like, hey, what would this look like if they're interested in podcasting or in skateboarding or in mindfulness or whatever the areas that you've got a lot of experience in. Like, honestly, it's not insignificant to say that to someone. To like, are you prepared to make a phone call, to have a coffee with someone? If you're interested in a new sport, are you prepared to even just talk to a coach? It's that inhibition that even stops you from the very smallest step that affects not just youth, but all of us. So I think that's what I would talk about in terms of goal orientation, and progress and towards a goal.
Awesome, man. Yeah, that's really great advice. And a lot of what you've shared today has just been grounded and practical. And I think that sometimes we're looking for this, magical answer, the 4-year Olympian, great. Just like over here, you're like, do you know how mother effing hard that was? Like that was, you know what I mean? Try and do that for a month, you got to persevere and go through. So I think that we'll get an idea. It's really beautiful advice. We're so terrible to ourselves. I don't know why. I'm terrible to myself too sometimes. And I'll do a meditation before the podcast and, before I record them out. And one that's come up the last month has been like, make the decision to be kind to yourself, to be your number one supportive, to be loving and kind to yourself, to give yourself space. And it's messed up that we have to use like a meditation and like a reminder outside of ourselves to be nice to ourselves. It's what the hell. And I think that.
Oh, sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say anything that's outside of your disposition. So your disposition, by definition, is just like your default, right? Like how you are. And if you want something to be different than how you are, and we're all wired differently, then yeah, it requires different actions, consistently, repeatedly. So it doesn't surprise me that, you would have to do that. So I totally agree with you on that. And probably need to start doing some of those myself.
Yeah, man, I agree too. So what I was going to say though, on your point, what I really liked is I think that in the same vein of how we communicate with ourselves, we have an idea and we sabotage. We think about all the ways we're going to fail before we even take the smallest step toward our success, towards something that we want to bring into our lives. And, I'd like to remind people like, man, give yourself a 20-year goal, a 10-year goal. You could be the worst at it. Think about whatever you're worst at And just imagine doing that thing 1 hour a day for 10 years. Then you're going to be a master at it. A lot of time in sport, I don't know if you've heard this before, you probably have, but it's not talent that wins. It's hard work. And you can see that over time. Like, you could be the worst at it, but hard work over time, if you love it, is going to pay off, and you're going to master it. It's so, going towards something that you love. So I want to ask you, after getting the success, Olympic medalist, you are successful in, the standard definition of the word. Like, what is success to you, and how do we achieve success?
Yeah, great question. Well, success to me these days is if I can achieve the sense of balance that we talked about earlier, and if I can truly, um, live the life that I want, where I'm learning, I'm staying fit, I'm spending time in the community, I'm spending lots of time with my son and my family, and not going after shiny lights and just chasing things because that's what society says is success. And winning an Olympic medal could be one of those shiny lights that people will look at me and say I'm successful because I have this Olympic medal. But what if I'm completely broken inside? What if that experience destroyed me in some way? Mentally, or even physically. Like, I do have disc issues in my back. I had torn tendons in my fingers. So you could question the actual experience of it. Like, was it worth it? Well, I think it's worth it to live a life where there's a great range between your moments of sorrow and pain and suffering and your moments of joy. I think a life deeply lived involves both. But now, in terms of success, again, it's really about, like, how do you define it, and are you being honest with yourself, really? And are you actually pragmatically taking those actions? Because you have to do things in this world, not just in your head or us talking. Like, when we shut off our computers and turn off the mics, what are we going to do today? Are those actions geared towards what we want? It takes a lot of discipline, actually. It may seem subtle, but it takes a lot of discipline to do the things that are going to slowly get you towards what you define as success for yourself. And I'm working on it. And man, you should have seen me this morning working on a keynote speech that I'm preparing. I'd work on it for 5 minutes, and all of a sudden I'm checking Twitter and I'm researching anything else but doing the work that I need to do. So you know what it is, and if you don't know what it is, you're slowly figuring it out, and you have to have the self-awareness and the responsibility to do what you need to do to slowly get there.
Yeah, man, 100% agree. Again, has a very, very practical answer. And again, I think that a lot, and even for me too, in researching peak performance and things like that, I want the gold pill or the magic key, and a lot of time that magic key is hard work and just doing the work. For example, meditation, I get so many different questions about meditation, like, hey, Matt, or if I'm on a podcast, give us the steps of meditation. And I say, sit down, shut the F up, just do that. And then, because it's the mind, I've meditated for a long time, but sometimes my mind just goes nuts, and it was not, and you could say that's a terrible meditation. I could say, Matt, like, as far as success in meditation goes, that's a terrible one, or it was an amazing one. Maybe my mind just needed to, like, go through that process, but I showed up. And I think, what you learned to do over those 4 years was to show up, continue to show up, even when the motivation's gone, the inspiration's gone, because, you've got that bedrock of resolve, which I really like. So when you're speaking, and let's say you're talking to, I don't know, different groups of people, you could have, your CEO or your athlete that has the shiny thing, but they're unhappy, or or you're doing a job, and you're in there and you want a little bit more. You're like, okay, cool. Cause I have a good friend, I won't mention his name because it's, but I always just tell him, you have a lot going on. You're really smart. You're grounded, you got the family. But if you don't, like, think about the next step of, like, what you would like to create, because you're an infinite creator, then you're stuck there, and it's not bad. You want to be grateful for everything that you have. But if you're like, do you see what I see in you? You know, you can create whatever you want. It might take you 10 years, but if you don't imagine the thought, right, then it can't become a possibility. So I think there's this balance between gratitude for what you have, but then also the imagination of how you'd like to express on the planet. And so I'm just curious, some of the things or advice you'd either give the CEO or the person who has a shiny thing. Maybe they have that gold medal, they have whatever, but they're not fulfilled inside. And B, for that person who's, you know, they're looking for a little bit more, you know, and they're just not really sure how to go about it or even think about it.
Yeah, wow, great question. I want to just preface all this by saying that I'm just an ordinary guy trying to figure it out like the rest of you.
Good.
I'm no guru. I mean, I'm just trying to sort this stuff out just like anyone else.
No way, man. You got the medal. You have the answers. You shouldn't have grabbed it. You shouldn't have that thing. You shouldn't, if you can't give us the answers.
Well, if you talk to my 8 teammates in that boat, right, you know, they might tell you all different things. So, but I'm sure there would be some common themes. Okay, well, maybe start with the situation where you have the shiny thing, the title at work, the Olympic medal, loads of money in your bank account, I don't know, whatever it is, and you're finding that, oh, something's still off, I still feel unfulfilled. It just sounds like a misalignment of what we talked about earlier of like, what is your ideal life, right? I think it sounds like a misalignment, and then you would have to ask yourself, I'm just doing a thought experiment of what I would do, right? I'm not trying to preach or anything. I'm just I've been doing this at different times over the last 6 years. So I guess I would just say, you know, well, where's the feeling coming from, and what am I going to do different, and do I have the discipline? You know, I came to discipline like some people come to religion. Like that's for me. I'm a chaotic kind of thinker, and I'm creative. I'm going in different places all the time. So I'm always taking it back to, do I have the discipline to do something different, to have a different sort of eventual outcome or reality. Uh, in terms of the person who's feeling unfulfilled and like needs a nudge or wants to do a little more, doesn't have the shiny thing. Well, it's almost like the flip side, but it's almost the same thing. Like, so what do you, you know, what do you, I'm like Mr. Pragmatic. I'm sorry, this is not groundbreaking stuff.
No, it's good. It's good.
But what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do differently? And you know, I actually think of myself as kind of a lazy guy. Like I have to really kind of flog myself sometimes, believe it or not, to make a change. Like for me, it's all about creating habits, because then I get on a groove, and then I can keep tumbling along. But if I haven't created the habit yet, overcoming the inertia, I find that really challenging. And I would guess that most people do too. So then, you know, don't take too big a bite. And what's the small thing that you can do um, to start exploring a new area? Because let's face it, it's probably just an exploration to begin with. It's probably not even action yet. But the action is in talking to people or doing the research. So, yeah, I'm sorry to be repetitive, everybody, but what is that smallest thing that you can do that's different? Because it's attainable, because we're all just bags of weakness at the end of the day, and we're trying to overcome that. So just make it small. Make it small and get after it. God damn it.
Oh my God. I have never heard that sentence before. It's so great. If I'm going to do a quote template, we're all just bags of weakness. Just gonna quote that. Oh my God. That's amazing. No, I think it's important, man. And the reason why I pose to you those questions is because you can speak from direct experience of the mountaintop, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, you're on the mountaintop. What's the secret? Yeah, the secret's hard effing work. You know, that's what the secret is. The secret is doing all these things that you don't want to do. It's just having time to think about it. It's not as shiny and glamorous, and it's not quick. You know, like you said, the road is windy, but sometimes you need somebody who's been there and done it to just kind of reaffirm those basic things, right? Like in basketball and sports, those, you know, say fundamentals, man.
Yeah, I mean, the truth has always been brutally simple. So I'll just be open and honest here, maybe a bit vulnerable. And for example, a more recent thing for me is, okay, so I have this Olympic medal. I spent 5 years writing that book, and the book was a similar process. So, you know, I didn't have a ghostwriter or anything. I told myself, okay, I'm going to try to learn this craft as best I can and do a really good job. and I'm proud of where it ended up. But I spent 5 years, writing and rewriting, and it was so difficult, just sitting in that chair at my desk like 4 hours every day for a period of 2 years. But that was basically all I was doing. I was trying to make a little money on the side with speaking engagements to cover my rent and my utilities and my food and pay for my son's sports registrations. And you can do a lot in this life. You just can't do it all at once. At least not me. I really need to be focused if I want to really see progress. And so I had to have narrow vision on that book, but now it's really resonating with people. And, it's, I had the opportunity to speak to you, and I'm meeting interesting people, and I love it. And now I'm hustling and getting it out there. And the next thing is that example I talked about earlier, like this keynote speech. It's daunting. Like none of us are, I think we're all nervous if we have to get up and talk in front of people, whether it's 100 or 5,000 people. And I've just honestly been relying on my charisma and a sense of humor and just trying to make people laugh. And sometimes that works, but sometimes it falls flat. And so now I'm challenging myself to, really add structure and rehearse and film myself and figure out how to self-edit and make it more succinct and make it more engaging and borrow from the performing arts. So now I'm back into this process of my next goal outside of the stuff that I do, just to make a living. It's this keynote speech, and I'm doing the same process I did for the Olympics, for the book, and now I'm doing it for this. And I'm using the same ideas, and I'm having the same emotions of I'm not good enough, and this is way harder than I ever thought, and I had this plan, but how come it's not working? And then just pushing forward, and it's on a daily basis. And maybe eventually I'm going to run out of money. I'm going to have to figure out what to do, right? Just like any of you guys would. So let's be real, right? Let's be real about it. That's what I'm dealing with right now. So I'm practicing what I preach. It's I'm having to always remind myself of how brutally simple the truth is, to actually live out. It's easy to talk about. It's not easy to live out quietly on your own when no one's around, when no one's watching you. What are you doing? Are you just cruising the internet and dreaming, and just dabbling and not really doing anything? Or are you carving out time in your most productive hours in the day to progress? It's as simple as that.
Awesome, man. That's a wonderful. I totally resonate with that. And, I think we keep touching back to the basics in sport. You're using the same model again and again and again. But once you pick something and you go through it, then that that's the model. And one thing that I need to learn is, I'm staying at a house with two amazing people, and one of them has a contract to fix all these houses. And there's a bike in the garage, and I'm not mechanically inclined. I can't fix a damn thing. But he's explaining to me the same thing. He's just like, I don't know what I'm doing half the time. I just figure it out. And so I'm just giving up before I even try to fix it. Right. Where somebody with a different perspective, who you would call it, AKA the handyman, he might not know either, but doesn't give up. It's just a different thought process. It's just like, I'm going to figure this out. I don't know how long it's going to take me. Ideally, it's quick. Normally, it's not. Normally, I got to screw around with stupid things. But eventually, you get there. And so you discover that with the Olympics, with writing the book being harder. And I wrote a book, too. It's way harder than I thought. And I naturally feel like I can write, too. And it's like, okay, yeah, I got this. It's like, oh, God, this, and then re-edit. So I can totally relate and appreciate that. But it's once you do that process once, you realize it's that same thing that, the brutal truths of moving through it.
Absolutely. And then you know how hard it is. Sometimes ignorance is bliss, right, to get you going. But you're gonna face those lessons, and you're gonna learn them for yourself in your own way. And it doesn't really get easier. You just align yourself to what's required a little better. It's going to be just as hard for me to pursue my next goal as it is for anyone listening or yourself to pursue your goal, right? And it's just, as you get older, you start to align yourself better and brace yourself. Okay, I kind of recognize where I'm at now. I know this feeling. I've been here before. And there's a quiet confidence that does come with that. But the truth is simple and brutal.
Yeah, man, dude. Yeah, I think all that's been just really practical and amazing. And like I said, especially coming from somebody who's done it, you're still humble. You understand these lessons, and you just keep applying them. Like everything that you've learned in the Olympics through perseverance and motivation and problem solving and just going past your limits. It's the same thing, and it's a different perspective. Yeah, you have this confidence that you can figure it out, that you do have more in the tank. It's like this is possible. And maybe if we can just give ourselves a small task, a little bit of a push, not self-sabotage before we even give it a go, right? Because it's going to be the same thing every time, right? You'll just get a little bit more familiar with it, and then over time, ideally, it will become a little bit more natural and a little bit more easy.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. Absolutely.
Well, man, I think that you dropped a lot of really practical and beautiful wisdom. I want to ask you though, before we go, because I think it was a really great episode. Is there anything that you wish that I had asked you, or anything that you want to talk about? It can continue to go on as long, but is there anything that came up that you wish that I asked, that you want to talk about, or anything that you want to close with?
I always like this opportunity where, if I'm doing an interview like this, and I feel like it's my job to be really real with people and really authentic, whether it's in the book or now with you. Um, I want people to know, I guess, that when I'm pursuing a goal, and for what it's worth, because maybe it's helpful for one person, it almost feels uh, like it almost feels like impossible a lot of the time, and it's like I don't want to. I simply cannot underemphasize whatever the word is enough that it's actually normal to really feel really far away from the eventual vision that you have in mind. And I want people to know that that's normal. As so much as I can share my authentic experience, which is a real struggle. I mean, much of my book is about it's an exposition on overcoming self-doubt, and it's messy. I'm no hero. I'm falling down a lot of the time, and I'll call my friends and family. I'll sort of come out of the cave once in a while, and I'll just be reeling, and I'll say, I can't. Nothing's going right, and that inner critic is running rampant. And I think that just from talking to people like you, and the more I talk to people, the more I find out that it's really a shared experience. So it's important to me to get that across to people that it is really hard, and a million things could have gone wrong that would have prevented me from getting that shiny Olympic medal. But I think the path is still, those tenets that we talked about, the path is still there. But yeah, it's tough. And I don't want people thinking that I'm just this holier than thou or higher than thou guy. No, I'm just like you. I did these, I had a plan. I worked really hard. It went my way, went our way. And the only thing that's guaranteed is if you don't try, that's the only guarantee that you're not going to get anywhere is if you don't give it a crack. And you only live once, so what the hell are you going to do? May as well. So there you go. I just basically paraphrased everything we've already talked about. So maybe that was unnecessary, but I want to convey, that. I tell my son, like my son's playing basketball and he misses a shot and he's hard on himself. I'm like, just, it's all right. Just on to the next play. It's life. It's fine.
Yeah, man. Well, no, I totally agree with all that. And you've been like practical and humble, and that's the realness of it. The realness, like you said, the brutal truth is it's doing those things. It's everybody has the same struggles, and coming just from someone's achieved it carries a little bit more weight because so it's really, really practical. And I like the Canadian comment. It's almost just like, just get her done. Like, what are you going to do? Just go do it. Like, it's important.
Get after it.
Yeah. Awesome, man.
Be kind.
Yeah, man. Yeah, 100%. Well, it's been a pleasure, man. I wish you nothing but success. Good luck with the keynote speech. Stay in touch. I encourage everybody to check out your book and your website and everything you're doing. But, I look forward to stage 2, perseverance and everything that you're going to continue to create.
Thank you very much. Maybe I'll give you a call when I'm sad in my basement one of these days, and I need someone to have solidarity with, Matt.
Perfect, man. Yeah. Oh, dude, I 100%. I'll call you, man. It's the case, dude. I'm going through it with the podcast and the book, and the same thing. I have to tell people, it's like, it's not all rainbows. I'm working my ass off and I'm trying to figure out life, and it's hard. It's like mindfulness and spirituality, right? It's just like, okay, like life is easy. I'm happy. No, I get pissed because it's challenging. I get to take those breaks and have just amazing humans to converse with. And we're just sharing. It's a shared experience. And I think that brings us back to community, brings us back to each other and realness that, life can be challenging and it's easier together. And it is easier if you're kind and you're capable of more than you think you are. And it's probably going to be a pain in the ass. So think about something you really want to do.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay, brother. Well, have an amazing day. Thanks so much for coming on, and we'll definitely stay in touch.
All right. That was a lot of fun. Thanks, Matt.
Okay. Peace, guys.